This webinar. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on international student conversion through community engagement and support. We're so glad that you've joined us today. As I mentioned, this webinar is recorded, so please feel free to reference it after. First, before we begin, we're going to hear two messages from our webinar sponsors. So without further ado, thank you, Adventus. We'll hear a quick message from them.
Hello, my name is Bjorn Myrie. I'm the Partnership Director for Adventus in the United States. We are a proud annual sponsor of AIRC, and please allow me a few moments to talk about some of the opportunities we offer our university and college partners before this webinar begins very shortly. Adventus is recognized for radical transparency and putting our institution partners in control of their international improvement through our platform. Every application we submit has been checked for quality assurance, completeness, and comes from a vetted and rated agent recruitment partner of ours. More and more institutions are taking advantage of Interstride, which is our premium marketing and analytic tools to help the university precisely target the applicant they're looking for and analyze where the student demand is coming from within our marketplace. We also see institutions needing support with admission processing, evaluation, in-country admission representatives, and Adventus professional services, or APS for short, can help those universities be more efficient, adaptable, meet student demand, and maximize their opportunity. If you'd like to learn more about Interstride, Adventus professional services, or becoming a partner with us, please contact me and I'd be happy to share more. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Adventus for your sponsorship of our webinar, and just a few minutes with our other webinar sponsor today, Language Cert. Thank you so much. Apologies for the sound issue there. I hope people were able to hear and read along. So thank you again to our webinar sponsors. We're really excited to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. Please, if you have any questions throughout, utilize the chat feature, and Jennifer will be monitoring that throughout. So Nitin, I'll turn it over to you to get started. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, AIRC, for inviting us to present. My name is Nitin Agrawal. I'm one of the co-founders of Interstride, a platform to support international applicants and students. I'll talk a little bit about Interstride later in this presentation, but prior to starting Interstride, my background has been mainly in the financial services space. I came to the US as an international student on F1 status. Like most international students, pursued investment banking after my undergraduate degree. Fast forward, I received my MBA from the Haas MBA program. After my MBA program, I had to leave the country because of H-1B issues. And somehow I was able to find my way back into the US on this special visa category called L1, which eventually led me to green card and eventually to US citizenship. So today I'm excited to share a little bit of industry perspective, but also my insights as an international student and professional. So along with me are Keith and Marcus. Keith, if you want to go next.
Great, thanks, Nitin. Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Ramsdell, and I'm currently serving as the Vice President for Enrollment Management and Marketing at Ashland University in Ashland, Ohio. You can kind of see the additional institutions that I've worked at. I've worked in undergraduate and graduate enrollment, and really for the last 2.5 years, I've been at Ashland in this senior position. And I'm also past president of NAGAP and have served on that board for about 11 years now, and I've graduate enrollment for about 16 years. So excited to be here, and thanks for having us.
Hi, everybody, I'm Marcus Hanscom. I'm the Director of Graduate Admission at Roger Williams University. We're a small private university in Bristol, Rhode Island in the Northeast. I've been in enrollment management for about 17 years. I did 2 years in undergrad and then switched to grad. I've been grad ever since and have certainly loved the work. And I did my undergraduate and graduate work at University of New Haven and worked with them for 9 years and had a pretty substantial international population there. Out of 1,700, about 40% or so were international. We have a much smaller international population here, but as with many of you on the call, probably are looking at international and non-traditional and graduate populations a little bit different at your campuses as we look at what that undergraduate demographic shift will look like over the coming years. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So the goal today is to cover a few topics, mainly around international student engagement during the admissions process. But before we jump into that, I'll cover a little bit about the international education market in the US, the current trends and themes. From there, Keith will talk about a really cool research that Interstride conducted with NAGAP, which is the Graduate Enrollment Management Committee. So we took survey results from international students who are already in the US. We compared that to professionals in the admission space, and we saw the differences, which Keith will share as the next, after I cover the themes and trends. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the support model that you can look at as you explore new tools and services to better support your applicants as well as students and alumni. So starting off, just a little bit of a view from a macro standpoint at what's happening with the international education space in the US. So as you can see here, in the last year, we've seen a slight rebound, 3.88%, which is almost the same as what we saw in 2016. And this rebound has been mainly due to graduate enrollment increases. So undergraduate enrollment is still down from our pre-pandemic levels, but graduate enrollment has bounced almost about 17%. But compared to some of our competitors like Canada or UK, this is still very low. And part of the problem is not really to do with the admission efforts or the enrollment efforts or what the admissions team is doing. It goes at a policy level. Canada has really laxed immigration laws, and there's a very easy transition. After completing education, students can continue to stay in the country. There are employment opportunities, there's ease of transition from student visa to residency. And you can see that stems from the top level. It's not just at the education, but purely as a migration tool, as Canada is trying to attract immigrants to the country. So for US, this was huge. Between 1990 to 1999, we were the #1 when we were trying to attract migrants. But currently, we rank #4 after Canada, Germany, UK, and then United States. If you look at the number here, this is a really important metric for anyone in the admissions team, because right at the onset, when you're reaching out to your students, the reason, and I can speak from my personal experience as well, when I came to the US, attending the right institution was obviously important, but I also came here for the American dream. And I wanted to pursue the right opportunities, the right job and employment. So 80% of students come to the US not just for the right school, but they want to work here after they graduate or find some sort of internship or work experience. So the more you can educate them, the higher the possibility is. But part of this also need to make sense from an immigration standpoint, where they can easily work in the country after they graduate. And here you can see with the declining domestic enrollments, the international enrollments will continue to play an important part in any of your recruitment efforts. As you hit you can see here, the numbers have been declining over time. And with this, the importance of international enrollment will continue to increase. On this slide, you can see the US. This is the 3% increase here from 2020 to 2021. When the US is increasing 3%, you can see the number for UK, Canada, and Australia. So UK had a 600,000 target, which was expected to be for 10 years. So they were aiming to get 600,000 international students in 10 years. And guess how many years it took them to reach that number? Just one. So they've already kicked that benchmark in 1 year. And again, part of that reason is post-employment opportunities for international students after graduation. So again, this gap has been narrowing over the last few years, and will continue to narrow if, from a systemic standpoint, we don't do a better job in addressing some of the core issues. Here you can see the metrics around the decline. So China, which is the single highest provider of international students to the US, the number has been going down significantly. So in the last year itself, there's been a 9% decline and so in addition to the other countries where there has been decline due to geopolitical issues, but China has been the major contributor of that decline. In terms of increase, India's numbers continue to grow. Part of that is for graduate admissions, and the light there is around STEM OPT. So most of these graduate programs with STEM OPTs, the students are allowed to work after they graduate, and that's where you see the increase in numbers. India, which is a cost-conscious market, in addition to high focus on employability, you see exact results when you see the growth, where this growth is coming from. And as I mentioned earlier, graduate students are driving the recovery compared to undergraduates, where there's still decline. So we are losing market share in the undergraduate market. But just transitioning from the macro level a little bit to the student experience. So the US education system continues to be challenging for international students, and not just from a career or employment perspective, but from visa denials to the PR around how students are welcomed, and the gun laws and the immigration stories. The cost of tuition is not the most easy for students compared to UK or Canada or some of the other countries. Work authorization, as I mentioned, it remains a challenge. And after students graduate, there's a fixed amount of time where they're allowed to find opportunities. Otherwise, they have to leave the country. So it is a very challenging process. And as an admissions office, if you can remove some of those barriers and give the comfort to international students at the onset, that makes them a lot more comfortable in choosing US over other countries. And here, just looking at the priorities. So in terms of what students rank, and this was a survey conducted by QS on 200,000 plus prospective international students. So it's very country centric. You can see, for example, China, India, they prioritize high quality teaching, and that research is available on QS website, so you can take a look as well. But the messaging has to be very country specific. Although Southeast Asian countries focus more on employability and the affordability of institution, the East Asian countries are very prestige oriented. So they are looking. So here's just a a sample of what these countries and prioritize in their choice of institution. And then the way students want to interact. So there's also an interesting point here. The university websites tend to be the #1 source of information for students. And this will be, you'll see this again when Keith covers our research with NAGAP. But university website, almost 70% of respondents state university website as the #1 source for information over social media or campus fairs or any other source.
Mhm.
And before you spend or invest too much time on social media, just keep in mind that the fad of social media changes over time. So although Instagram was the most popular source 2 years ago, now it's not the most popular option. So you can go this maze of trying to figure out where the students are, but ultimately one thing is really important, which is your assets, which include your university website and your outreach to students, which students rely on most. And then finally, one last piece before I turn it over to Keith. Students want to be communicated. They expect to hear from universities on a weekly basis throughout their pre-enrollment journey. And this intensifies even further once they apply or make an application. So with that being said, I'll pass it over to Keith to talk a little bit about this research that we conducted and also share the anecdotes around it.
Great, thanks, Nitin. Before we get into the research results, and you can kind of read through what's here on your screen right now, I want to thank Nitin and his team at Interstride. NAGAP, for those of you who may not be familiar, is the professional association for graduate enrollment management. And as a volunteer-driven organization, in order for us to provide the research to our members that they want and expect, we partner with organizations in many different fields. In fact, I think this year we have as many as 8 or 9 different partners where we're conducting this original research and pushing it out to our members through webinars like this, through white papers and so forth. So thank you, Nitin, for your participation and your support in this. This is our first effort in the international space, so we're very excited about this partnership. We're also partnering with QS this year, so both of those partnerships have gone extremely well. We're very proud of that fact. And in this particular research, again, I just want to mention that what you're seeing here is kind of our first presentation of the results of this research, and the white paper that corresponds with this will be released at our annual Graduate Enrollment Management Summit coming up in April in New York City. You can check that out on our website at nagap.org. So with that, let's go on ahead and get into the research here. So we'll go on to the next slide here. And just as far as the methodology, again, as Nitin already kind of introduced, we had 2 different parallel surveys that were taking place. Interstride had already surveyed a number of the students who had come into their site. So they were gathering research from 345 international students, currently enrolled international students from 56 countries around the world. You can kind of see there the breakdown of that. 82% were enrolled in master's degree programs, 18% were in doctorate programs. So a very nice cross section of international students around the world from different, again, different locations. So a very diverse population. On the NAGAP side, we then asked very similar questions, but we were asking it from the perspective of the graduate enrollment management population, that community, to see whether or not their assumptions lined up with what graduate students were actually saying. We had 84 respondents, again, from private and public universities, large and small, and you can see the different level of those professionals from mostly from the director and assistant director level, but across the institution. So as you look at the departments, again, graduate enrollment professionals serve our students in a vast and very diverse manner. And so it's not like undergrad. We work in all different, from college level to program level to institutional level. So it's all across the board. But we felt pretty good about, especially with the focus on being on international enrollment, 84 respondents. We were very pleased with that for our first year doing this research. So, and then just very briefly, this question was not asked of the students, but we were looking at specifically how are graduate enrollment management professionals reaching out to prospective international applicants. And there were no surprises here. The top three were email, website, and webinars. And then it dropped off considerably, looking at about 38% participating in various school fairs, in-country workshops, direct mail, and so forth. And then it dropped off very, very quickly. So I don't think that there were any surprises here whatsoever. I might shoot this one though over to you, Marcus. I don't think that there were any surprises here, but I don't know if you have any specific insights from this slide.
Well, I think just one thing I'd be curious to know, like if we were to look at this even 5 years ago before the pandemic, obviously mobility for even our professionals in the field has changed. And then the financial wherewithal for us to pick up and go to be in country, let's say for 2 or 3 weeks. I think schools are less apt to do that right now because they don't have the resources to do that. And I'm sure our international folks on the call know that they're coming from under-resourced offices in most cases. So they don't have a lot of additional people to sprinkle around the world, even if they had the financial means to do so. So I'm not surprised here that school fairs and workshops are kind of low on the totem pole. But I think the important thing for us to recognize, and this isn't new news to anyone, but obviously the relationships are critical with what you build. And anybody who's done in-country recruitment would probably vouch for that, that they're really pounding the pavement and building relationships with agents, with advisors, counselors there, obviously with parents and families. And if you're not able to do that, how do we make up for that on this side? And I would argue that emails or our website on its own aren't going to do that. So you have to start thinking about, do I have some sort of interactive portal? Do I have a chat bot, which many of us are starting to look at? How do we get our current students from other countries connected with these students? So that level of engagement is necessary that we're no longer able to produce on the ground. So how can we take technology up a level and make sure that that works for everyone? And still, largely, most of us are doing armchair recruitment. So how do we do that effectively? And I think that's the question we all have to answer.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, great. So we start getting into the student responses now, and this was looking specifically at what were the most challenging aspects of the admissions process. And any of us who have been working with international students for any length of time, obviously finance and tuition costs were, that rose to the top of the results. No surprise. Visa and immigration issues rose to the top. But the next couple, I think, were a little bit surprising, especially for GEM professionals. We'll look at this in just a minute, but looking at choosing the right institution. And I think this is not just the institution, but even the location of the institution. So there were a lot of factors that we know went into this. And then also choosing the right program with so many options to choose from. I think choosing the right program rose up there. And then there were a smattering of others. But I think when we look at the next slide, then where GEM professionals came in, certainly finance and tuition costs were up there, and visa and immigration issues. But then if we look over at the next slide, I think that GEM professionals were not really in tune with the next piece here. So we'll look at that in just a minute. But if you look at some of the quotes here, was there anything here that surprised you, Marcus? Any quotes here that kind of jumped out?
Well, I think it's important when we talk about UI, user experience, those types of things, and the connection between the information that's important, whether we agree on or at least understand what's important to international students. Obviously, we have insights here. But if we're not able to connect students with the answers to those questions easily, they're going to dismiss us just like anybody else does. I mean, I always talk about our domestic students having marketing ADD. It's like you've got a couple of seconds to really grab them. If you can't, forget it. And if you have a website they can't navigate, or they don't have a portal or something that gives them interactive, engaging, and quick and easy information with transparency, they're kind of out of there, especially for mid-level brands, smaller brands like ours. where we're competing in a much bigger pool and dealing with rankings and other types of issues. The other thing that I pointed out to Nitin and Keith with this research is, at least on this particular part of the survey, the student side of the survey, these are students who are already here. So we have a little bit of a bias in terms of the responses here. I'm glad that, you know, finance still comes to the top, but the students who are here have found a means to get here in some way. So their responses may be a little bit different than the folks that maybe had an intention and an interest in coming here, but otherwise couldn't make it happen. So whatever reasons those aren't connecting, and there's logistics beyond the marketing and admissions and recruitment pieces, but I'd imagine financial is an even bigger issue for those folks. But again, getting through the chaff and getting that information to folks quickly. And I think in many cases, families are still actively involved with the college search for many of the younger graduate students, and we can't negate their influence as well.
Yeah, very good points again, Marcus.
And to your point, Marcus, I think, just because these students are already in the US, that choosing the right country is not higher on the list, because for prospective students, so say for when I was applying to institutions in the US, UK was fair game as well, or Australia. At that moment, it just seemed like, finding jobs or opportunities in the US would be much easier and probably the best option. But I think with students who are looking for or about to apply, the country piece is also very challenging.
Yep, good point. Yep, so as we move on to the next slide here, then what you'll see is that the GEM professional, they got it right on the money when it came to finances and visa and immigration issues, right? That we're all aware of the fact that those can be challenges. But the assumption was then that the next one in line there was understanding the application process. The interesting thing is that understanding the application process by and large, and I think this was maybe true earlier on in my career, probably for all of us here, that used to be a much bigger issue. But now it seems as though professionals are assuming that that's a much bigger issue than what international students are indicating in their responses. Only 27% of international students said that that was the problem. Now, again, to your point, Marcus, maybe those who weren't able to get enrolled or they weren't surveyed, maybe that was a higher number. But for those who were able to enroll, they were able to maneuver through that process relatively easily, it appears. But where there's misalignment, that's what we really kind of want to focus on here. So there is some misalignment in understanding the application process, but also these are the two big ones: choosing the right institution and choosing the right program. The students had indicated a much more difficult time in making those choices, and the GEM professionals, that's just not on their radar. They didn't think that was a concern almost at all. I mean, 10%, 13%, that's very, very low. So there's a huge misalignment there. Marcus, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, one thing I'll point out for folks that are readers, if you look at a book called Different by Youngmi Moon, she's a faculty member at Harvard, or at least was. She describes an example here that I think is relevant. That when she and her husband would go into like a Foot Locker or Foot Action, one of those types of places, and there's hundreds of shoes on the wall, and she talks about her husband going in there and saying, like, I want that one, like on this particular row, like that exact features, like you can nail exactly what those things are. And she said, as a category outsider, I walk in there and just feel totally overwhelmed. And I think our international students are in a similar boat. You're looking at, let's say, MBAs. There's hundreds of MBAs out there. How on earth do I figure out which one is the right one for me? And if we don't have ways that differentiate who we are and clearly make those differentiations obvious to the students, there's no way for them to make that selection. So they're really just going, okay, I've chosen to go to the United States. I've chosen to get my MBA, but now what? And if we don't have good resources or good supports for them to figure out how to make that choice, I'm not surprised at all that they're kind of going, well, I don't know what to do here. So choosing that right fit school, it's not any different than our domestic students. They have the same issue of trying to separate all these programs out there. And unfortunately, schools are just saying, well, we need to capitalize on our international students because of either revenue or headcount issues and kind of making up for the decline in undergraduate and so on. Rather than saying, well, we need to have something that's differentiated that offers true value to these international students. Our architecture program here at Roger Williams, for example, has a guaranteed paid assistantship and an internship. So our students come in and do research their first year because of, obviously CVIS issues. But then second year, they can use CPT and go do an internship with a firm. Everybody gets that opportunity. So we have some students from Iran here who we had to beg, cheat, and steal to try to get them through the embassy. It was a much bigger challenge. And of course, they have other geopolitical issues. But they came here because that particular thing gave them value. So they saw value in coming here. They could do the extended OPT, but they have something that gives them work experience here. If you don't have something that differentiates, I don't have that in every program. I can't say my MBA has something magical that works, like this, like the architecture program does. But it's key that we work with our academic players at the institutions that we represent and try to figure out what exactly that value is that we offer. And one thing that wasn't explicitly discussed in either the QS or this research is the whole element of safety. And particular countries view safety as a different issue too. I was just talking to one of our faculty from China and talking about how Chinese students are particularly worried about safety. And it's easy for us because Bristol, Rhode Island was named the safest college town in the country. So we're saying, well, hey, look at safety, but we're also not in a major city. So we balance some of those, students who want urban experiences, but they want a safe campus. So those types of things, become differentiators, but how do we make sure that we're getting those right messages in front of the right countries and the right audiences? And that's a challenge, especially when we only have one or two people in our offices. So I think that's something we all have to acknowledge, but also get our institutions behind.
Well, and I think that's, oh, go ahead, Nitin.
Sorry, one point I would like to add as a student who was completely, indifferent to different brand names. So as a student in Nepal, I knew about Harvard or Stanford or maybe a couple of the big brand names, but University of Miami or Ohio State or Emory University or any other was, for me, I wasn't aware of those brands. The big differentiator, however, when I applied based on my SAT score was the scholarship. So depending on my ability to pay, that then became the default institution because I knew, okay, I could afford this versus another one which didn't give me a scholarship. But just one indicator of how it played out for me.
Well, and I appreciate that. And one of the things, Marcus, you used the word resources. So I want to move forward here just for sake of time, because I know we have a ton of research to get through here. But you mentioned resources. How do we communicate, the information about our programs that is most effective? And again, I don't think that there were any big surprises here at first until you really look a little bit more deeply into this. And I know that this was something that maybe surprised you a little bit when we were going through the prep. University website, not necessarily a surprise there. Email communication from the university, not necessarily a surprise. I think the one that that students brought up that was in, not quite in alignment was the general internet. And so that is a challenge for us because, it means that prospective students are out there using resources beyond, and again, it shouldn't come as necessarily a surprise to us, but if we flip to the next slide then, again, email and other communication from the university, not a surprise, university website, university admissions office, college fairs. This is the GEM professionals' responses, right? Where in here is kind of that general information. And so when we look at misalignments, the students are saying they're using general internet search to go a lot deeper, to look for more details and more information on where they end up than what we assume. GEM professionals said 13% said that they would be, that a prospective international student would be using the general search function to look for information. It's actually 48%. Email, we thought, GEM professionals thought 73% said they'd be looking at our emails. 45%, it's still relatively high on the list, maybe not as much of a misalignment, but still significant. College fairs, we assume that more international students are getting their information through college fairs. It's actually about 20%. But I agree with you, Nitin, from our prep for this. I was much more intrigued by that gap in using general internet search to look for information. Marcus, I'm going to throw it over to you again. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the general admissions folks aren't thinking about SEO like they should. I think that's one glaring gap for all of us is, so search engine optimization for those who might not be familiar, but that kind of organic awareness of our brands beyond just paid ads and things. And obviously that's a different animal with our domestic and international students. But there's an awful lot of different sites that we won't go down that rabbit hole today, but there's a lot of sites where there's a lot of reviews, and we know international students are very much word of mouth, some countries more than others. But when you have pockets of students have good experiences, they let people know about that. But then if you have one student with a bad experience, it can poison the well for years. You all know that. So really trying to get that experience out in front of students is important. And assuming that, again, our domestic market too, but the international students overwhelmingly are stealth behavior applicants. They are looking at schools long before they ever talk to us. And they're overwhelmingly looking in different time zones than we are. Many of us are asleep when many of these students are searching. I've had some of my best conversations on our chatbot at 11 o'clock at night here that are overwhelmingly international students looking at that hour, at least in our time zone. And they have questions and they need support. So being available for them is one thing, but giving them opportunities for engagement. And if you looked at the social media charts that Nitin presented earlier, even though Instagram's dropped, Instagram and YouTube are still the top. These are students that are using video, they're using engaging opportunities to learn about your schools. They're not necessarily reading the catalog copy on our websites. So really giving them engaging content that they can find on their own that doesn't require a whole lot of effort is absolutely critical.
Totally agree. And the next slide is even a little bit more revealing. And again, no surprises here. It shouldn't be anyway. That when we look at specific resources, online resources that international students are using, they're still using US news and rankings, right? They are using some other resources here, and there are others that are listed here, but the top ones on their list, US news and various rankings. And there weren't any real surprises here. If you look at the following slide, and how GEM professionals responded to this, they know, we're all aware rankings are very important. And again, as we talked about in preparation for this session, this varies somewhat from country to country. And the slide that you showed earlier, Nitin, kind of reveals that, points to that a little bit. But rankings are important. There was an assumption that social media is maybe used more than what it actually is. You can see the alignment and the misalignment here in the lower right corner of your slide. But here's one that I thought was really interesting. 43% of GEM professionals simply said, I don't know. I'm just not sure. And that I think is perhaps even another misalignment that, we're not sure anymore. And maybe this is a post-COVID kind of situation for GEM professionals. So again, for both of you, I asked the question, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously rankings are important, but when it comes to, I don't know, what thoughts come to mind for you there?
Well, I think it depends on the response. I think a lot of the folks that we have are generalists. I think myself included. I'm supporting 10 different master's programs with domestic and international populations and the law school to some degree. I mean, so we're not necessarily deep diving in some of the areas where we need to. So I think there's an opportunity for professional development, and that could be AIRC and NAGAP that are playing a role in that. Could be other organizations, NAFSA and others. So I think there's some question there. I also, I encourage folks, and I don't think it's this audience on the call that needs to hear this, but being engaged in the news and understanding what's happening around the world, the geopolitical issues that are impacting certain students right now, knowing that my Iranian students can't access their banks and their currency is being devalued, and obviously the things that are impacting them from a social standpoint, where some of them have family members that are being detained. They've had friends that were dying in the earthquakes in Turkey. These types of things are really critical for us understanding them, not only in supporting our current students, but also in future recruitment efforts, and really showing some level of empathy. I think if we learn anything from COVID, I think we've talked a lot about empathy as a skill, as a trait that's necessary for recruiters. I think it's even more critical now, especially with international populations, and you need to communicate that out through your various marketing channels so that people know that it's a level of care, it's a level of understanding that's not culturally just not getting what's going on, but really giving students the right information, but understanding that you're there for them, that you're acknowledging those things. And even though we can't give them a full tuition waiver, acknowledging that there's issues, and that just little bit of empathy, we've heard a lot of response from students has been very positive, that they understand that we can't give them infinite amounts of money, but they appreciate that we are acknowledging their space.
Yeah, good point. Good. Well, let's go on to the next slide then, where we talk about, we asked the students, did you receive satisfactory information from the admissions office on the topics below? And you can kind of see this: academic courses, yes, career outcomes for students. Again, outcomes, I think, becoming more and more important, both for international and domestic students. Guidance on the U.S. visa and immigration, job and internship opportunities. They did receive that information. But let's take a look at what GEM professionals thought. In some cases, extreme, opposite kind of view. Guidance on U.S. visa and immigration, yes. Financial aid, scholarships, career outcomes, doing reasonably well. We assume that we're doing reasonably well. But when you look at travel arrangements, academic courses, housing and residence, we assume that we are not providing sufficient information in those areas. And you can see there on the misalignments, vast differences there on academic courses. Actually, students thinking we're doing a great job. We don't think so. Career outcomes, students think we're doing a reasonably good job of that, 73%. We don't think we're doing a good job on that. On-campus employment, again, there's some significant misalignments here. Marcus, Nitin, thoughts on this?
I mean, as far as travel on housing and residence, I mean, I think I'm glad that we're acknowledging that that's a problem area. But it's not just a matter of communicating that's a problem area. It's a problem area in and of itself. We don't have enough international housing for students. We don't necessarily have good supports for getting students from the airport or even from their home country to us. Some schools are doing this very well, but others, I think, in general are not. And we can't start saying we want more international students, but not have the appropriate supports in place for them. And before we ever could communicate that those are good things, we need to have them in place. And I think most schools are missing the boat.
And I think also it depends on the type of students that attend a particular institution. I mean, again, it comes down to, if your students are looking for employment opportunities, you want to feed that information to your clientele per se. But in my case, for example, I didn't care about academic courses. I was looking at the rankings and I assumed their rankings would correlate automatically to good academics. So, courses by default was like, okay, the rankings takes care of that. So the importance was on employment, was on financial aid. So those were the things that I was looking for as a former student. But I think at least for admission officers, it's identifying the type of students and feeding information that relates to that specific institution.
Oh, good point. And then finally, we had one other question that we asked here. And Nitin, I think this is a good segue into kind of your closing aspect here. But the students were asked the question, which of the following would have influenced your choice of institution during the admissions process? What would have impacted that perhaps the most? A better understanding of career outcomes rose to the top. That would not have been on my list, right? So I think that there was, and we'll look at the misalignments here in a minute, and some of the alignments. More of our GEM professionals maybe got this right than I would have. Better overall support from the institution. This is a kind of general response. So it's not pointing at any one office. It's just kind of general overall better support, better information on scholarships and finances, better information on academics, and the ability to connect with existing students or alumni. Again, no huge surprises here. Maybe the level of response or the amount, the percentage may have differed, but I think that there are some clues here in things that we GEM professionals and those participating in today's webinar, there's some real things here that we need to take to heart. If we compare this now to how GEM professionals responded on the next slide, again, we are looking at better information on scholarships and finances. That's very, very high. 85% thinks, again, focused on the financial piece of things, maybe more than we need to. Better overall institutional support, no surprise there. Better information on visa and immigration, existing students and alumni. But we don't get into better understanding of career outcomes until way down at 38%. So when we look at the misalignments, that's a pretty significant misalignment that for students, career outcomes very high on their list, 58%, gen professional 38%, and better information on scholarships and finances. We think that that's a much bigger problem, but apparently we're doing a reasonably good job, maybe not as good as we should be doing or could be doing, but we're doing a reasonably good job of meeting that expectation. So Marcus, thoughts on this final slide here?
I think it comes down to one primary thing, and that's clarity on value. I mean, if you don't have clarity on all of the things you're buying into, grad school, especially when we're not giving full tuition waivers, at least not here, and I think a lot of similar schools are in that boat. If you're not finding really good clarity on what value you offer, we're asking for somebody to pick up and move halfway around the world and spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on an education, sometimes finding that from every corner of friends and family to support them. And you've got this whole kind of group that has to buy into this idea, and you're giving them an idea that's half-baked. I mean, it's really not clear what you're doing. I mean, most of us aren't buying houses or buying cars or getting married to people that we don't know everything about what we're getting into. So why aren't we going to do the same thing for international students here? I mean, we have to assume that students are going to be really scrutinizing this investment of time and money and putting themselves well out of their comfort zone for most of these students. So, and you're talking about sense of belonging being a core kind of American, or excuse me, core human need that we all, it doesn't matter where we're coming from, we want to feel like we belong. So if you're going to make that investment and put yourself out of your comfort zone and have to come out of your shell and be uncomfortable, you'd want to make sure you have all the details in order. And it sounds like a lot of us aren't doing that very well.
Yeah, we certainly have work to do. So, and I, again, some of the recommendations here offer more resources and support for international students. No surprise there. Offer students a vision of their education from beginning to end. Nitin, you and I have talked about this at length, that it really isn't just get these students in the door, and we wouldn't expect that from domestic students. We shouldn't expect that, as you said, Marcus, from international students. So from beginning to end, what are you getting for your money, for your time, for everything you're putting into it? And then make international students' admissions experience a strategic priority. Make it smooth, make it seamless. We're working on our campus to make that better. And I love your point here, Nitin, you added this into the slide. Delegate someone to own that experience. There should be somebody who literally wakes up every morning that's the thing that is their top of mind, first thing that they think about every single day. So with that, again, this is great information, great details. The white paper will come out with all of these details and more. So thank you, Nitin and Interstride, for working with NAGAP to come up with this opportunity. And with that, Nitin, I'm going to hand it back over to you now.
Great. Thank you, Keith. And thank you, Marcus, for sharing your valuable insights. So with that, just some concluding thoughts here on what the ideal model could look like. So I'm looking at from admissions all the way to graduation and post-experience. So during the admission phase, there needs to be transparency of process. So what is the employment opportunity like? And maybe it's not that easy, but students still need to know what the journey will look like for them in the next 4 years or the next 2 years. And at any given institution, the ISS office, for example, has the OPT employment data. So that, for example, can be shared with your students to showcase your employers and the partners that are offering jobs and internships. During arrival, students might not have their social security, for example. They won't have their driver's license. They don't have a bank account. They don't have mobile services. So how do you make that seamless to inform students that, look, all this can be taken care of. Here are the resources that we have for you. So there's no anxiety around that process either. While they are attending, they'll naturally, when their classmates are looking for internships, their domestic peers are looking for internships and full-time opportunities. Students, the international students too, need to look for opportunities. Now, the professional connections back home are far off, and most, if they're coming here for their undergraduate programs, they don't even have any kind of connections back home. So the university has to put in that extra effort to make sure even these students are given the right opportunities, or at least some sort of access and guidance to that information. And then when these students graduate, there needs to be a way for them to find opportunities either in their home country or in the US. because I'm sure you've witnessed, and a number of you must have witnessed, that these students take out loans at high interest rates, and now some of them have to repay that as well. So how do we make sure that there are post-employment opportunities for these students? And then if that experience is provided, you can also engage your international alumni in your recruiting efforts to talk highly about your institution. But that's, I mean, obviously a lot of this is idealistic, but that's what a sustainable model looks like. If we look at it from a long-term point of view and growing the US recruitment. And so it's not just up to the university, because it's not just the admissions office's job to offer all these. So even within an institution, you have your alumni services office, your career services office, your ISS office. So, and university is one stakeholder in this big network of tools and services that are needed to support international students. So how do you partner cross-organization, but also with industry partners to make sure that this service is offered to international students? So selfish plug here, obviously we support international students through a technology platform. So it supports on the applicant side, there's a platform on the career side. So it's an end-to-end platform for international students. And then really the goal of this service model is to make sure the sustainable growth for institutions in better supporting international students. A transparent process will allow students to align their expectations. A better student experience leads to higher student retention. Higher student satisfaction leads to referral to the university, where they talk about the university with their friends and family, which continues to attract more students to your institution. So really not just thinking it from a marketing standpoint, but a sustainable, systemic, and developing this infrastructure within your institution. That's part of the success factor. But that's pretty much it from my end. And thank you again, AIRC, for inviting us. We are open for any questions or comments, feedback. But yeah.
Thank you all so much. This has been really interesting to hear kind of the student perspective on some of these questions that you asked in the survey, and the misalignment, which I'm sure for a lot of folks may be a surprise or may not be, but we did have one question, and I encourage anyone to please enter a question into chat or the Q&A. And this one question from Cameron has to do with, is the same data on growth markets from IIE and QS available for international students coming to the US for high school secondary programs, potentially as a leading indicator for post-secondary in some markets?
I think the data is available. It's a pretty comprehensive, thorough report. So you can, if you go to QS website and click on their research tab, you'll see the report top of the page. But I think it does include the data that you were requesting here.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, or panelists, did you have anything else to add? Oh, here's a question. How important do you think educational agents are in promoting and informing of career outcomes?
I can jump in if you want. I mean, I think agents are a critical spoke of this whole thing. I mean, really, we have to treat agents as our on the ground kind of extensions of our staff and extensions of our voice, and have to be kind of gospel on the ground for us. But if they're not empowered with the information that we need, then there's only so much that they can do. So I think they're a valuable part of a bigger operation that needs to happen around international students, and certainly where relationship building is critical. And I know there's more sensitivity around that in different countries than others, but having boots on the ground that can be that for you, that's a valued partner, that is a good cultural fit, forgive the word, but a good cultural fit with your institution, that can also then share that appropriate information, knowing that international students are saying this is important to us. You know, you have to make sure that they're armed with that information. And I don't know about everyone on the call, but I know that institutionally, we sometimes struggle with getting good and, you know, the volume and the data around what our students are doing, particularly after they're gone more than a few years, and trying to comb that back. It's hard on the domestic market, and it's just further magnified with our international students. So getting good, accurate data is an issue. But if you can get that, I think it's critical arming the agents on the ground with that information.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Rachel, would you like to maybe give us a brief on our next webinar?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much. Our next webinar will actually be happening next week on March 9th, a week from today. And we're really excited because this will launch AIRC's new institution agency partnership series, which will essentially be a series of webinars over the next couple of months to talk about effective and sustainable partnerships between institutions and agencies. So our first part in the series will be on contracts and payments. And again, that's next Thursday, March 9th at 11 o'clock a.m. So check out the website for the full description and to register. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you again to our panelists for such a wonderful presentation.
Oh, it looks like there's one more question, so we have a couple minutes. What have you noticed in terms of conversion yield with meeting where the student wants to be contacted? For example, WhatsApp for South Asia.
I don't personally have a lot of WhatsApp experience myself. I know our international folks do more directly. But anytime where you have that direct connection, especially beyond an email, I think just in general, intuitively that you're getting more conversion yield there. So we certainly have more strength when we have personalized information to the student. So identifying where they're coming from and giving them information that's specific to the issues that they have. But then further being able to meet with them directly and on a time zone that works for them. So, I mean, all of that's no brainer for you all, but utilizing Zoom and other virtual opportunities to connect them and connecting them with students, whether you have a platform or not to do that, I think it's critical to get them in front of current students and asking the questions that they need, and that infinitely just boosts your conversion yield.
So just to share a slide again from that same QS report that I mentioned earlier. So I don't think you can convert anyone just from WhatsApp directly, because it's not really, you're not able to engage someone specifically just to one medium. This is, according to QS, this is what it takes to convert a student. So it took 53 email communication, 25 messages, 6 phone conversations, 3 live chats, 2 webinars, and 244 days from first inquiry to enrollment. So I think WhatsApp is piece of the puzzle, but it's not the answer to conversion. So you can't just base, or at least you shouldn't base your strategy just on one medium. And I think that's what they cover in this previous slide as well, where again, based on your country, it's the channels used are completely different. So again, it's a really cool report worth taking a look, but hopefully gives you some color.
Thank you so much. We'll send out a link to access that report when we send out the link to this video. So thank you so much, our panelists and Rachel, for helping put this together. And I don't think we have any other questions, so I think we can leave it at that. And we look forward to seeing you around. Those of you that might be going to NAGAP and those of you that are going to NAFSA will certainly be there.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.